Hi, everybody. Welcome again. This is Jennifer from Weinberger Law Group. We're going to do a webinar today. As you see, I'm going to start our slideshow here from the beginning so everybody can see what it is that we're talking about. Today's webinar, we're going to be discussing getting a temporary restraining order here in New Jersey, information, assistance, resources to help survivors get safe. Have you ever wondered how it is that you're going to get a restraining order? Are you needing to be safe? Do you need some resources that are local to you? We're going to answer those questions today. We're actually very happy to be welcoming a person in the community who is one of the directors of Alternatives to Domestic Violence here in Hackensack, New Jersey, David Cohen. David, I don't know if you want to say hello and introduce yourself and let us know what it is that you do at Alternatives to Domestic Violence.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, my name is Dave Cohen. I'm director of ADV, or Alternatives to Domestic Violence. That's Bergen County's co-lead domestic violence agency. We are a division of the Bergen County Department of Human Services, and we provide a wide array of services that are provided to individuals and families that are struggling with domestic violence.
All right, Dave, thank you. And I'm sorry it says Jennifer D underneath you there. But for everybody, that is not Jennifer D, that's David Cohen. All right, so let's jump in. Of course, first, our disclaimer. As you know, the presentation contains general information only, does not constitute legal advice. Any persons that we discuss in this webinar are entirely fictional. Please be sure to direct your specific questions about your own situation to an attorney if need be. Again, talk to us. Give us a thumbs up if you find this information useful. Ask us any questions that you may have. Again, we're live. So if you have any questions, you can even ask us underneath the presentation here, or if you feel more comfortable, you can absolutely send us a direct message, which we can answer afterwards. So getting a temporary restraining order, information and assistance for domestic violence survivors here in New Jersey. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk with Dave about what is domestic violence, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the legal steps, the lawyer perspective, if you will, for getting a temporary restraining order here in the state of New Jersey. And I'm going to talk a little bit more with Dave about local resources, including Alternatives to Domestic Violence, where Dave is the director here in Bergen County. And if we have time at the end, of course, some questions and additional resources we're going to provide to you. So part one, what is domestic violence? This is actually a quote from Alternatives to Domestic Violence. You could find it on their website. It says, domestic violence is a systematic pattern of abusive behavior with intent to gain and maintain power and control over another person. So pretty good all-encompassing definition there of what domestic violence is. And Dave, hopefully you can help us out with this one here. A question, doesn't my partner have to hit me for it really to be domestic violence? I know this is something that, as an attorney, I've gotten this question a lot. Does this come up a lot with you as well?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a question that'll come up with both the victim and the offender. You know, the actual definition of what is abuse. Abuse within an intimate partner relationship comes in many forms. And physical violence is certainly a great concern to all of us, but there are many ways that one partner can abuse another, absolutely devastate them, in fact, without ever using their hands. Such things as emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse. So, the actual act of assault, while of great concern, is by no means the only method by which someone can be abused.
Right, and it says here, in fact, domestic violence can take on many forms. Stalking, even economic control. I know we talked actually a little bit earlier about this before we were waiting to sort of go online and start this, that even in a more affluent county such as Bergen County, there is a form of economic control that involves perhaps a very wealthy spouse keeping money from the other spouse as a form of abuse, right?
Yes, I mean, we see that across the economic spectrum, as you mentioned, in more affluent communities. Just as an example, you can have a victim of domestic violence who might live in a multi-million-dollar home, yet none of the assets are actually in her name. So when it comes down to taking steps to free oneself from abuse, the fact that there's no economic strength in the hands of the victim, the finances are really used as a weapon in the hands of the abuser. And in lower income communities, we have a similar issue in as much as, if one of the partners, particularly the abuser, has control of the finances, the victim might be hesitant to do anything because the threat will be that if you call the police, if you get a restraining order, if you leave me, they're going to cut off the electricity, you're going to get evicted, you're not going to have food for the kids, I'm not going to pay child support, and so on. So money is used as a weapon quite a bit in domestic violence situations.
All right. So we put together a little bit of a scenario here. This can be a common situation and sort of addresses a little bit about what we were talking about. We call them Jane and Jason. They got married right out of college. Jason went on to law school. They had 2 children. Once Jason became a partner in the firm, he became extremely stressed out. The couple began arguing more and more, and Jason began controlling everything, including what Jane wore, her access to the money, sort of what we just talked about, where she went and with whom she spent time. He even put a tracking device on her car. Now, again, Dave, this is domestic abuse. This is not necessarily classical violence, but it's certainly abuse.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly with the advent of the increased technology that is available to almost everyone at this point. Domestic abuse was bad enough before, but now such devices such as a GPS or tracking devices that can even be downloaded onto one's smartphone make certain, if you would like to say, classic domestic violence offenses such as stalking, harassment, not only in the ways that have always been available to abusers, but now it can be done strictly through technology without the knowledge of the victim. So yes, all the aspects mentioned there are considered domestic abuse. Absolutely.
Right. So abuse really, and hopefully Dave will agree with me, abuse is any behavior that is used to control or intimidate another person, can be verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual in nature. As you see here, these are examples of abuse, and you can read them here. I mean, there's a lot of instances in which an abuser can control or intimidate another person. Again, the physical abuse you see there in the middle is, the actual hands-on pushing, shoving, slapping, throwing objects at a victim, using a weapon, any type of activity that is used to harm, control, or intimidate somebody that would fall under physical abuse. You could see examples there. The emotional, psychological abuse, name calling, put downs, threats, stalking. Dave just talked about the new ways technology is allowing people to stalk or intimidate. A newer one, Dave, I don't know if you're seeing more and more of the gay or lesbian, the LGBT community threatening to out a partner It seems to be becoming more and more common as LGBT relationships are coming more to the forefront. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, well, we've always known that domestic violence knows no bounds when it comes to which, communities and sub-communities it affects. And really, anytime you're going to take two people and put them in a relationship, you have the potential of domestic abuse. And that goes for heterosexual couples, gay or lesbian couples. And we do, see, the threat of being outed is a very great concern. Uh, but we've always provided services to the LGBT community as needed. And, everybody's welcome to seek services with us because we do understand that it affects every community, and each community might have specific concerns to their particular problems, but the general struggle against domestic violence is really similar regardless of who's involved. And that goes for the disabled community, the elderly. Really, it reaches across our community, in full.
Right. And so important to note for the community that, again, there's no definition of a classical relationship, and there's no, everybody is an individual. And unfortunately, these types of relationships, people that find themselves in abusive relationships, those situations are as unique as the people in them. So there's no community, unfortunately, that this doesn't touch. And I wanted to just say a little bit about the last one, the sexual abuse. There used to be a very long time ago, and hopefully we're doing away with this thought that, if you're married or in a relationship, you are somehow allowed to sexually assault or sexually abuse your partner because you're married to them. That's not the case. Should never have been the case. But we're seeing more and more now. Hopefully, Dave, you're seeing more of a shift in attitude that married couples don't have the right to sexually abuse one another.
Yeah, well, this is a big misconception when it comes to domestic violence. A lot of people assume that when you speak of sexual abuse, it wouldn't pertain to people who are married or even in a relationship of any kind, because people assume, well, they're a couple, they do have sex, so how can you have sexual abuse? But this is a very important point we make to our adult clients and to the young people in our outreach program. When we go to high schools and middle schools and so forth, we stress that consent is paramount in every case, and it doesn't matter if someone is your regular sexual partner. On any given occasion, anyone has a right to say no, and the word no means no. And if the other person does not respect the word no and tries to have sex by force, it becomes sexual assault. And it doesn't matter if someone's married, they have children together, they've had sex together hundreds of times. Anybody has the right to say no. And this is a very important point. And, making that point to young people is really critical as well. Consent is a very, very important issue.
Of course. And, we also want to note, you see at the bottom there, we have that little sentence in that box there that your safety is most important. And, while education and getting, educated about the law and about the services out there is so important. If you find yourself in this situation, please know that first and foremost, your safety and the safety of your children is really what's most important. So consider that first and foremost.
Yeah.
All right. So what is the cycle of domestic violence? Dave, we hear this a lot. How would you describe the cycle of domestic violence?
Well, the cycle of violence is a concept that we really stress in our counseling and education services. Whereas there might be tension in a relationship, and the tension is there and it builds and builds, and then you have, let's say, the explosion, which is normally the incident which unfortunately people can get hurt and or arrested, and that's the incident that often the police get called around. And then we have the honeymoon phase, which is where people make up. There's maybe gift giving and apologies, and let's face it, makeup sex and all the different things that go on in a relationship. But because it's a cycle, if there's no intervention and the parties do not get help for their issues around abuse, we go right back on the cycle again. And there are couples who stay on this merry-go-round for many, many years. And unfortunately, when we're speaking about domestic violence, it does not remain static. So if it's bad today, it's going to be worse tomorrow. And if you stay on the cycle long enough, each time you go around, there's the potential that the abuse, when we come back to the explosive incidents, can be even worse and worse. So it's very important for people to be aware of it and to break, this cycle. Many people, if not most, are unaware that they're even involved with this cycle until it's pointed out and they can, evaluate their own situation and they realize, wow, this is me. I've been doing this with my partner for years. And again, the potential danger is tremendous. So, the sooner people are aware of it, the better.
Absolutely. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about how you get a temporary restraining order here in New Jersey. What actual practical steps you need to do to get that first restraining order. That this is prior now to the final restraining order. So steps to get your initial or your temporary restraining order here in New Jersey. Number one, know where to go. Okay, so where do you go to get your temporary restraining order? Well, first you can go to your local family courthouse during regular hours, though. So those court hours really statewide are 8:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon. Now, if an incident happens outside of business hours, you can go to your local police precinct, of course, unless it's an emergency. If you're in danger, if your family is in danger, if your child is in danger, you're in the midst of as Dave said, an acute situation that's going on, obviously call 911, get help, get safe. From that point, the officers will assist you in obtaining a temporary restraining order. Now, when you get to the court, if you're going directly to your courthouse, again, you want to go to the Superior Court in your county. You want the family division. And when you get there, you need to tell the court staff that you need to file for a temporary restraining order. Most courthouses have a separate unit for domestic violence. Number two, prepare your paperwork. You will work with the court to file for the temporary restraining order. The temporary restraining order contains the basic information and the details of what is called the Predicate Act. The Predicate Act is the incident that caused you to go and get this particular temporary restraining order. It's what this temporary restraining order will be based on. Now, you want to be really thorough at this point, because you can go back in and amend a temporary restraining order if you forget details, but it's a little bit difficult, and that's going to prolong the process. So you want to be really thorough with all details regarding this most recent act, the Predicate Act, but also include any incidents of past domestic violence. So even if you didn't go get a restraining order in the past, it doesn't matter. If there were incidents and you have a history of domestic violence, you want that history to be included in your temporary restraining order so that the judge can look at it later on in your final restraining order hearing. You can also include a request for support in your temporary restraining order, and what that means is if you need child support immediately, especially if your now separated from your partner, your child's other parent because of the restraining order, you may need child support immediately, and you can include a request for even spousal support in your temporary restraining order. Next step is have your temporary restraining order issued by the judge. The judge will decide if the temporary restraining order should issue immediately. The abuser does not have to and is not obligated to participate in whether or not the temporary restraining order will issue immediately. In fact, even if there's an issue or an incident, and this is common, if there's an incident in the middle of the night, there are judges who are on call to decide 2 o'clock in the morning if a temporary restraining order needs to issue immediately. If the TRO is granted to you, now don't forget the judge has to decide whether or not a TRO should issue. It's a lot easier to prove and obtain a temporary than it is to obtain a final. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but once the judge decides, yes, there needs to be a temporary restraining order, there's danger here to this person, a copy of that restraining order will be given to you, and you need to keep that on your person at all times. If they give you multiple copies, have one in your car, have one in your purse, have one on your person, have one in your home. Really important you have that on you at all times. And again, TRO I just mentioned can be issued outside of regular court hours, excuse me. Again, try to be as complete as you possibly can with your details in your temporary restraining order. The temporary restraining order will be served upon your abuser. You don't have to worry about doing that, obviously. The sheriff's office will serve the temporary restraining order upon the abuser. And there you go. Serve the TRO on the abuser. Again, not for you to do, obviously, so don't worry about that. Once it's issued, it is formally served by a sheriff. It's a formal service process. The abuser at that point is on notice and cannot contact you. Report any contact immediately to the police. And what's really important to note here is you see third-party contact is absolutely also a violation. What does that mean? Well, your abuser cannot ask his mother to call you and deliver a message, or his brother-in-law to show up at your house and ask you to drop it. That's also a violation of the restraining order. Really, really important to report any violations of the restraining order because those are quasi-criminal. It's a not 100% criminal, it's still heard in the family court, but it's a quasi-criminal act to violate a restraining order. From TRO to FRO, well, how does that happen? Well, as I said earlier, it's much more difficult to convert your temporary restraining order to a final restraining order. That's done through an actual hearing or a trial, and that court date is going to be set within 10 days of your getting your temporary restraining order. That's actually in the law. Now there's always circumstances that can push that date, but according to the New Jersey Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, the court date must be held within 10 days of your getting the temporary restraining order. I would strongly consider a family law attorney for this action, at least, and I know Dave and I talked about this a little bit earlier, Alternatives to Domestic Violence will, in certain circumstances, provide you with an attorney to represent you, but they will also, which is really fantastic, have you sit down with an attorney and do trial prep. If you can't have an attorney come with you, they'll at least prepare you for testimony. It's an actual trial, so there's evidence and you have to testify, and it can be really, really stressful. There's court procedures that need to be followed. So again, at least consider a consultation with a family law attorney. Your temporary restraining order will go away if you do not prove your case. The temporary restraining order will be dismissed. So if you don't prove that domestic violence happened on that day, then it will be dismissed. Also, even if you prove that domestic violence happened on the day that you got the restraining order, or based, the incident that you based the restraining order on, the judge then has to consider whether or not there's a continued need for the restraint. Is there an ongoing danger? If there's no ongoing danger in the eyes of the court, it's unlikely you will get the final restraining order. What are those situations? Well, think about if your abuser picks up, moves to California, and you don't have children together, and there's really no occasion that the two of you would run into each other again. The court may see that as there's no continued need. Again, just an example. There's, circumstances and situations, they're all different. If the judge does find that there's a continued need for restraint, your TRO will become a final restraining order. Final restraining orders in New Jersey are permanent. Unlike other states that have sometimes a 2-year prohibition or a year prohibition, here they're permanent. They're difficult to remove. So yes, an abuser can go forward and ask that a restraining order be removed, but it's very difficult. It's a very high legal standard to prove. So part 3, additional information and resources. We're going to pull Dave back in here to talk about what further information and resources are available to domestic violence survivors.
So at ADV, we have, again, a wide array of services. As far as the legal services, as you mentioned, we have what we call a legal consultation, where we have extremely fine attorneys who will come in not to represent you, but can guide you as far as which direction you should go. That is not around restraining order issues, however. That's with other issues regarding the relationship and where the client may want to go. Our court prep is very important. And as you said, very advisable to anyone who's going to be going to court and taking out a restraining order. It is very overwhelming for anybody to deal with the legal system, regardless of what the issue is. Particularly in a case of domestic violence for a victim, it is very important to be prepared to go in and, running through the scenario and what you need and what you should be thinking about with one of our legal advocates is very, very important. We have the DVLAP, Domestic Violence Legal Advocacy Project, for those individuals who are appropriate for it. We do have a panel of attorneys who provide pro bono services to our clients. So if somebody can get that, we're happy to hook them up with one of those attorneys. In the court, we have a presence every day, and we do a number of things. We have our court accompaniment program, which is very important. These are volunteers who will do just that, accompany a victim throughout the court proceedings. Again, it could be a very overwhelming and emotional experience, and these individuals are not there to be counselors or legal advocates, just as the name implies, to be a companion, to be someone who's there for emotional support during the course of the proceedings in the courtroom. Our hotline is open 24/7. So this is important also because at any time, day or night, any day of the year, if someone has either concerns, anything from questions to actually dealing with a crisis, we do have our hotline open. If we don't have people in the agency itself, we have an answering service which will connect the individual calling to one of our professionals who can be reached on the phone. So at any time, we're there to help on an emotional basis and as well as an informational basis. So legally, that's a great deal of what we do. The dissolution counseling that we provide in the court is also important. If someone actually receives a restraining order and at a later date decides to drop it, which is really, as you said, it's permanent in New Jersey unless the victim decides to drop the restraining order, the judge will ask the individual to meet with one of our counselors, and we provide information I think it's very important to point out that although restraining orders are critically important, and we're obviously very happy that they exist and they are very helpful to many people, it's not always the best answer in a particular situation at a particular time. And what I mean by that is when you're dealing with an abuser who has at least some respect for the law or some fear of punishment, the restraining order is a great thing because it can keep the offender away, and the offender's fear of imprisonment or something along those lines will keep the individual away. However, there are some abusers for whom the knowledge that their partner has taken a restraining order out against them is very dangerous. Now the anger and rage and irrationality can be piqued, and the victim could possibly be in even more danger because of the restraining orders. So we at ADV do not pass any judgments. We provide information, the pros, the possible cons, and it's obviously up to the individual to decide whether they want to keep a restraining order or drop it. No one knows the abuser better than the victim, and sometimes there are other ways that we can go about it. As we say, the restraining order at the end of the day is a piece of paper. It is not a suit of armor. It is not a bulletproof vest. It is not a bodyguard. So we realize that. So we will never dictate to someone, oh, you shouldn't drop this restraining order, or you should definitely get a restraining order. We're going to give, all angles of the situation, and a person will have to decide. And of course, if somebody decides to drop a restraining order or not even get one, that doesn't mean that they can't go back at a later date and take a new restraining order, or, as the situation develops, have a change of heart, a change of mind, and go in a different direction. But it is very important to realize that sometimes the separation is the most dangerous time for a victim. And, being aware of that, we counsel the client accordingly.
And such an important point too, Dave, that you had mentioned that, even if the victim decides, or the survivor, I should say, decides to go ahead and dismiss the temporary restraining order, that they can go back, if something else arises in the future. Hopefully it doesn't. But the same goes for if a temporary restraining order is dismissed by the court. Just because you're not successful in getting the final restraining order doesn't preclude you for the rest of your life going back to court and asking for another temporary restraining order and then attempting to get the final restraining order. Some people aren't successful the first time. As terrible as it sounds, those cases, from a strictly legal standpoint, the more history there is, the stronger case that it is. Now, of course, that sounds horrible. You don't want to have somebody with a long history of domestic violence, but, from a strictly legal evidentiary perspective, don't be disheartened if you're not successful getting the final restraining order at the first attempt in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of a note here, we kind of went ahead with our resources nationwide. Dave, you see these resources here, NOMORE. You could reach them at nomore.org. Actually, last week was NOMORE Week campaign. I'm sure you've seen their television commercials. They're a pretty visible organization. There's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. You see the website there. There is a national hotline to go along with ADV's hotline. You see the number there. And then there's the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I don't know, Dave, if you need to add any to that list or if that's pretty comprehensive.
That is comprehensive. I would just stress that in Bergen County, we're actually very fortunate in that we're the only county that has two agencies that are recognized as lead domestic violence agencies, ourselves, ADV, and the Center for Hope and Safety, formerly Shelter Our Sisters. So They also have their own hotline, and they are accessible as well. They deal primarily with housing issues, crisis housing or shelter, or transitional housing, and some other services as well. And of course, our hotline. And there's also the number's not here, but the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, which is an umbrella organization for most of the lead domestic violence agencies and some others in the state of New Jersey, and they're located in Trenton. So there really are a lot of resources. Bergen County in particular and New Jersey generally really, are at the forefront in dealing with domestic violence.
And there you see the the websites for Center for Hope and Safety that Dave was just talking about, Dave's organization, Alternatives to Domestic Violence. You see their website there, and the hotline for New Jersey. That's New Jersey Domestic Violence hotline number there, 1-800-572-SAFE. So Dave talked a little bit about alternatives to domestic violence. What I sort of wanted to point out that he didn't mention is you guys have been around for a long time, 1978. That's fantastic that you're have maintained such a foothold here in Bergen County.
Yes, we are celebrating our 39th year of service this year, based here in Hackensack. For the listeners to understand also, we have one of the most comprehensive programs in the state of New Jersey, in that we not only serve victims and survivors of domestic violence, we actually also provide counseling to perpetrators of domestic violence. Our mission is to one day end domestic violence, and we believe very strongly that that's not possible unless you deal with the root of the problem, which are the perpetrators of these acts. So we have a very extensive program for male offenders and female offenders as well. We do provide services for predominantly female survivors, but we work with male survivors. And everyone should understand also that in every community there is domestic violence. Anytime you have two people in a relationship, you can have domestic violence. So we are very sensitive to and provide services for many of the cultural and ethnic groups in the community. We have services in Spanish. We now have services in Korean as well, which we're very happy about. We have served the elderly, the disabled, really LGBT, every community and sub-community within our overall society can get assistance at ADV. Clinical help, counseling, the legal help that we discussed before, and we have a really great community outreach and education program as well, where we get out into the community. We go to as many schools as possible, middle schools, high schools, colleges. With the high schools, that includes mainstream schools, alternative schools, parochial schools. We do professional trainings. We go to houses of worship. We train law enforcement and corrections officers. We really do whatever we can to get out into the community because we really believe intervention is critical, but prevention is really the key if we're going to really make a dent in this really terrible problem that our community and the country and the world struggles with, domestic violence.
Absolutely. Well, I should have pointed out there in case anybody did not notice, there's the 24-hour hotline that Dave talked about earlier, 201-336-7575. Also really important to know, I don't know if Dave hammered this home, but it should be hammered home. No one is ever turned away due to lack of funds.
The vast majority of our services are no fee at all. There are a couple of services that are, but that should never be a consideration if someone is seeking services or pondering whether or not to pick up the phone or to come in. We serve anyone, and financial resources are not an issue.
And that's where you can come visit and talk to Dave more if you need to. He's located, and not just him, but Alternatives to Domestic Violence is located at 1 Bergen County Plaza on the second floor right here in Hackensack. Their hours there Monday to Thursday, 9 to 9, Friday, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And again, there's the hotline for you if you need to talk to somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Thank your lucky stars that ADV is in existence and that there's other programs like them helping victims and survivors of domestic violence. So that's all for us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our Facebook events tab to be notified about upcoming live webinars that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks and months. There's the link there. If you need to reach us, we can certainly help you and assist you with any further information regarding restraining orders, divorce, separation, child support, really any other area of family law you can think of. Our toll-free number, 888-855-3014. Also visit us at weinbergerlawgroup.com. There you can find a wide array of information regarding restraining orders, divorce, again, any really area of family law. We have blogs, and of course, our videos do reside on Facebook, so you can go back and view them again if you weren't able to join us live. We are always free to answer any questions you may have. If you didn't want to post them live, please shoot us a personal message and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. I want to thank David Cohen again so much for being with us. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate what he does at Alternatives to Domestic Violence. And
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks again, Dave. Take care, everybody.